Hi, everybody. Hi, teacher. I just want to greet everybody and say hi. Sorry about the mix-up with the food. We're working on it, and there's more coffee out there too. Randall got this, so he's covering this. I wanted to say what a great convention this is, except for, of course, the convention. And I want to welcome everybody. Appreciate you showing up and the great dedication shown by all the people willing to stand in the back. And I just thought it was worth getting him in here so I could see Rand in person. And one is Jeff Larson is going to say one word or two, and he's the head of the RLC. And there.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have a room packed with people who love liberty and want to come to here. Thank you all for coming to our convention. Thank you for coming to this meeting. I'll notice if I try to recognize everybody in this room you might know, we'd be here all morning, and none of you are here for that. So I would like to just recognize a couple people that I know. We are blessed with the presence of Representative David Simpson from the Texas and also sitting up front, another Ann Lee from Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition.
The fight for freedom.
Yes.
Marijuana. It's about the right for you to choose, and not have the federal government tell us what to do.
Now, I'm not going to belabor our guest speaker's introduction. I think most of you know who he is. He's a native son of Texas down in Freeport. He's the son of a great patriot and a man who served us well in Congress for many years. I'm proud to introduce an ophthalmologist, a great human being, and the current senator from the state of Kentucky, Dr. Rand Paul.
Thank you. My wife tells me, don't try to be funny. You're not very funny. I don't always listen to my wife. That's a problem. And so yesterday, again, how many people were at the speech yesterday? So anyway, I try to tell a joke, and I think it would be kind of funny. Actually, the joke was suggested by somebody I met. We want to get that guy back, a Marine back from Mexico. Let's trade some Democrats instead of trading the Taliban. Anyway, immediately we get questions from the media. Is he serious? Does he think Democrats are the same thing as the Taliban? And so my chief of staff had a funny response, and so he sent out a tweet that said, "Oh no, we were just kidding, except for Nancy Pelosi." But one of the things I thought would be nice to sort of keep this casual, and we'll see if we can get a little bit of conversation going here in a minute. But when kids come to Washington, whether they're 5th grade or whether they're law students, I ask them all the same question. And I think it's one of the most important questions, and it's underrepresented, under-discussed in most of our schools. And the question is, are we a democracy or a republic? Many of the kids get it right, but some of them don't. And this is really such an important question that we know what we are. You know, to be, it's the beginning of the conversation. We're a republic. We're a constitutional republic. But what exactly does that mean? Our founding fathers knew this. They really knew this. You know, when Ben Franklin comes out of the Constitutional Convention, people ask him, a woman comes up and she says, what are we? You know, what did we get? Did we get a monarchy? Did we get a democracy, or did we get a republic? They knew the difference back then, but they also knew how important it was to have a republic. Jefferson said that a democracy would be nothing more than mob rule. In some ways, it was the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And so it is important to know, and the reason is that in a republic, your rights are sort of, they pre-exist and they're written down, they're codified, they're in the Constitution, but they're yours. And no majority can take them away from you. The majority can't take away the Second Amendment. A supermajority could, and it's complicated, and it takes a while, and it's hard to take away an amendment. We never have done it. We've never gotten rid of it. Well, we did once. We got rid of prohibition. Some are trying to do it again. But we have gotten rid of a constitutional amendment, I think just one time that I know of. But it's difficult because we don't want to make it easy to take away your rights. Your rights are yours. They're from your Creator. If you don't believe in God, they're still naturally yours. They're inherently yours. They're your rights, and no majority rule should take them away. Why is this important? Because some, the progressives, starting with Oliver Wendell Holmes and others around the turn of the century, really believed, oh, it's a living, breathing, evolving Constitution, and it is what the majority says it is. But here's the interesting thing, and this is sort of the I think, unseemly underbelly of progressivism, is when it started, most of them were in favor of Jim Crow. Most of them were in favor of believing that certain races had superior attitudes and were better than others. These were Democrats to a person, and they were progressives. Who segregated the federal government in like 1915? Woodrow Wilson. We had integrated government from the time of the Civil War on, mostly Republicans, and then we get Woodrow Wilson and they add back in segregation. So much of this came. I lived in a state that was all Democrat. Democrats voted against the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. But it is something that's important to know that never happens if you don't believe the majority gets to decide things like this, that you have an inherent right. Later on in Louisville, I'll be opening an office in the African American section of town where we haven't been for 100 years. We're going to call the office the William Worley office. William Worley was a black Republican. He founded the NAACP, and in 1917 he took the case of Jim Crow housing segregation all the way to the Supreme Court and wins. This is what we were as a party. It's what we've always been, but somehow we got lost somewhere, and the Democrats now think they're the party, but they were always the party that were holding people down and holding people back. We were the party of the Bill of Rights. We need to be that party again. There are three big issues I've been taking, and I've been saying these are the issues we take to people who come from big cities, some who live in poverty, some who have long-term unemployment. And these are the three issues that we say, you know what, we understand what's happening to you where you live, and we're going to change it, and we're going to be the party that change it. The first is that the war on drugs has had a racial outcome. 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown. However, if you look at surveys of drug use, whites, blacks, browns, everybody uses drugs about the same amount. In fact, there is a book about the mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. It's not on purpose. It's not done sort of like we're going to do this for racial reasons, but there's a racial outcome to this. We need to be aware of it because those who live in the black community are aware of this. Those who live in the Hispanic community are aware of this. And there are whites caught up in this too. I have a good friend whose brother, 30 years ago in Kentucky, grew marijuana plants, got a felony conviction. He still can't vote. He still can't own a gun. He has an MBA and he's a house painter. Think about what happens. Think about when you go to apply for a job and you have to put convicted felon. There are some changes. Some are what you're talking about, making it a state issue. I'm trying to make some of these felonies misdemeanors. It's not quite, some people want legalization. I'm not going quite that far, but I'm trying to make them misdemeanors. Trying to get rid of mandatory minimums so we don't put people in jail for 10 and 20 and 30. One guy sold marijuana, he's in jail for 55 years. You can kill somebody in Kentucky and be out in 12. Right. All right, so we've gone a little bit crazy on this. In 1980, there were 300,000 children with dads in jail. There's now 2 million children with dads in jail. So I think if we show compassion on this, we show that we want to change the criminal justice system to make it more fair, I think we have the ability. I'm going to take this message to the National Urban League in Cincinnati in July. I've been invited to the NAACP. This is a message that can resonate beyond the traditional Republican crowd and bring in new people.
Absolutely.
I'm also going to talk about school choice. I've been to Philadelphia, talk about school choice. I've been to Philadelphia, I've been to Nashville, I've been to Chicago, I've been to the home of vouchers in Milwaukee. It is an issue. My kids went to public school. I went to public school, Brazos Wood High School in Lake Jackson. My kids go to public school in Kentucky. There are good public schools, and we don't have to be sort of the enemy of public schools. There is no constitutional prohibition from the states and from your state government being involved in schools. But the thing is we also have to acknowledge that in some of the big cities, the public schools have let the kids down. The great equalizer, if you're a poor person in our country, is education. And there are all kinds of examples of people who came from nothing, who got good educations, and you can compete with anybody. And our society is more open than it's ever been. But we need to be the party that is for helping the kids who live in the poor section of the big cities to get a better education, and I think that's school choice. Criminal justice, school choice, and then the final thing that I'm trying to bring to people who live in big cities, who live in poverty, who are associated with long-term unemployment, is economic opportunity. I have a bill that's called Economic Freedom Zones. And some purists say, well, you're just giving tax breaks to poor people. That's what it is. It isn't perfect. It's not a perfect tax cut for everybody. But it's a way of saying, you know what, our message has been tax cuts, stimulate the economy. Let's go ahead and do targeted tax cuts to the big cities. So I went to Detroit last year. Detroit has 20% unemployment. It has 50,000 feral dogs roaming the streets. Most of the street lights are shot out. Most of the houses are abandoned. Miles and miles of extreme poverty. And I went there and said, Republicans, we have a message for you. We have something we'll bring to you. We take the income tax, the personal income tax, to 5% for 10 years. The corporate income tax to 5% for 10 years. Capital gains. When I spoke to the Detroit Economic Club, I said, look, what we're bringing is a stimulus, a $1.3 billion stimulus, but why ours is different than President Obama bringing an $800 billion stimulus or whatever he did, is that he picked who he gave the money to. And in business, 9 out of 10 businesses fail, so if government comes to you and says, Mr. Smith, here's $100,000 to start a business, 9 out of 10 times you'll give it to the wrong person and the money's wasted. Think Solyndra. But if we give a tax reduction to people already in business, you've already voted on who gets the money. So if I go to Detroit and say I'm going to dramatically lower the taxes, if you don't work, I'm not lowering your taxes because you're not paying anything. So it's those who are working, those who have businesses will get bigger. And maybe some businesses will move into Detroit that hadn't been there. Same in Louisville, same in rural eastern Kentucky. It's a message we can bring because we need to show that we have compassion for those who don't have anything, for those who live in poverty, for those who are unemployed, and that our system, low taxes, capitalism, this is what will bring wealth to their communities. But you have to show up. You have to show that you care, people have to believe that you care, and then we'll win. Then we'll be the dominant party. In Texas you are, but we're not nationally. We still need Texas. But we're not nationally. I think that the Liberty crowd, if that's who we are we the Liberty crowd here? Yeah. I think that liberty or freedom infuses tradition, infuses traditional conservatism with the excitement, the energy, the outreach that we need. There was a guy named Frank Meyer, and he wrote for the National Review 20, 30, 40 years ago. He talked about fusionism, that the real key and the energy is fusing libertarianism with conservatism. liberty without tradition, it's sort of like life without, to me, belief in God doesn't really have its meaning. So really you need liberty, but you need tradition also. You need a virtuous society. I'm just really not thinking the government's going to give you virtue, but I'm not saying you don't need virtue, and that we don't need virtue for civilization. So really it is a combination of the two. And the interesting thing about it is I go around the country, no matter who I talk to, whether it's the establishment, the wealthy that support our party sometimes, or the poor, people say, it's our time. It's time for this sort of libertarian moment, for this liberty moment. And so what I would say is it's no longer something that scares people. It's what people say, you know what? We can't run the same old again. We're not going to win with the same old. Chamber of Commerce is fine. I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce. But the Chamber of Commerce Republican is not going to win a national election. I'm not saying we give up on what we believe in, but we have to expand what we believe in. Do we have another microphone?
I don't believe so.
All right. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do some question and answer, as long as they're easy questions. And you just have to speak loudly so everybody can hear you.
Start over here. Ryan, I'm a fellow physician, and Obamacare is a great travesty for freedom of choice in medicine. And I'll make it very brief, but half of the funding for Obamacare came from our seniors, $716 billion. And my question to you is twofold. Number one, with private insurance, and most of the people here, the younger people here, freedom of choice in choosing a hospital, a doctor.
Other medicine.
Other medicine, the freedom of choice there. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, as a conscientious member of society, what about the seniors? When all that money's been taken away from them, when the baby boomer generation is going to grow 20–25% by 2020, supply and demand is going to cut off senior health care. What about not so much freedom of choice, but no health care for our seniors? Can you comment on that?
I think you posed the question about Obamacare really perfectly, and this is the way we need to talk about this. Obamacare really isn't just about health care. It's about freedom of choice versus coercion. It's about whether or not the government can tell you what kind of insurance you have to buy and what it has to cover. And my wife's been bugging me on this, and she's exactly right. She says you need to point out that Obamacare provides everybody with diet counseling, but when you get cancer, you may not be able to go to MD Anderson. And if we frame it that way, I think your second point about how Obamacare really is taking away from Medicare is a good point. This is something I tell people when they come to Washington is that we're $1 trillion short every year. So we're spending money we don't have. But you also, if you want something, if you come to Washington and you want something from me or you want something from your government, I say, tell me where to cut it. Tell me who to cut it. It's got to come from somewhere. We can't just print it up or borrow it. So we have to realize we have limited resources. We did take it from Medicare and realize that Medicare is $35 to $40 trillion short over the next several decades. All for one simple reason, same as Social Security. Social Security is $6 trillion short. All for one reason. We had a bunch of people born after World War II, then they had less kids, and their kids had less kids. So demographically, we have a large retired population and a smaller workforce. Originally, these entitlement programs ran surpluses because you had 16 workers and 1 retiree. Now it's a little bit less than 3 workers for 1 retiree, and it's headed closer to 1 to 1. So demographically, they do not work unless we fix these systems. They also are the driver of everything. The entitlements are 2/3 of your budget, so these have to be discussed. Nobody's talking about it. Republicans are afraid of the issue, Democrats are afraid of the issue, and we get nowhere. But they have to be addressed, and the longer we put them off. And I think the other way to put it is that particularly when you talk about that you take away, it's sort of like with disability. Are there some people truly disabled? Could we have that part of government? Yeah, but if you have everybody on disability, then the people who are faking are taking from those who are actually in need. And so we do need to realize and pit the people ruining the system against some of the people who are truly in need.
Yes, I really like your proposal about the tax-free enterprise zones that you're talking about for Detroit. And I believe that using taxes to stimulate the economy is a great way to build the economy and build businesses. So I wanted to ask you where you fall on the fair tax issue, because what that really is a fair tax across the board that eliminates the income tax and gets rid of the IRS.
I'm all for getting rid of the IRS. The political difficulty I see in the fair tax. I'm not against the fair tax, and if you can help me get it passed, I'll vote for it. We have to, the fair tax proposal, the official proposal says we repeal the 16th Amendment. I'm all for that too, but realize how difficult it is to repeal an amendment. I'm not for adding any kind of national sales tax while we still have the 16th Amendment. So if you can get enough of a movement that would actually do it, I'll participate in it. I've also been a fan of just lowering and making a flatter, lower income tax, and I'm promoting that as well. But I don't go around disparaging the fair tax. Every time, and I mentioned something favorable about my campaign, it is something the left is very effective at campaigning against you on the fair tax. They put ads all over the TV saying you want poor people to pay 30% more for their milk and for their gas. And I know there are exceptions for the poor in it and things like that, but that's what you get mercilessly hit with if you're for the fair tax. But no, I'm for anything that reduces overall taxes. And that's one thing where we as Republicans need to be on the same page with is most official Washington, even in our party, the best they think they can hope for is revenue neutral tax reform. To me, it's a waste of time. We need lower taxes.
I think it's fairly obvious that the Republicans are going to take both the House and Senate in 2014. Your colleague over there in Kentucky, who happens to be the majority.
A little bit louder.
You have a colleague over there in Kentucky who happens to be the majority leader in the Senate, who doesn't seem to put the budget as one of the first priorities. Who wants to do that? What is the chances that the Senate is going to tackle the budget issue?
This is we all seem to be unified when we're in the minority, and we all sound really good when we're in the minority. And when we're in the majority, we control the House, Senate, and the presidency. We somehow forgot that we were conservative. Republicans doubled the size of the Department of Education, federalized more of the control of education, and then also bailed out to the banks to trillions. And a lot of people have forgotten that the Tea Party really arose over opposition to Republicans who bailed out the banks. That we were the middle class who wasn't in favor of bailing out Wall Street. And we can't let them forget that. Many of the people will remain though, and they become in some ways what you ask them to become. Some people have very strong principles and they are who they are. And then some people, I think, can be pushed and made to believe in more limited government. The budget process is bad, and they already worry about it because they worry about people like me, your senators, and others that may not vote for a budget that doesn't balance. And they already start to talk about this. Some of these Republican budgets, the first Paul Ryan budget never balanced. Then another one balanced in 28 years. And then the one that balanced in 10 years accepted Obamacare taxes, which we supposedly were getting rid of Obamacare. So there are some of us who think that, I figure my compromise is, look, we'll balance it over 5, but I think that's a compromise. That's what the balanced budget says, the balanced budget amendment that we voted on each time. It says that it needs to be balanced in 5, and it literally probably does take 5. It will be hard to do it, your first budget, but you can do it over 5 years. The interesting thing is, and this is something I like pointing out because it's a very simple thing to visualize. If you were to cut 1% of government across the board for 5 years, the budget balances. It really points out that it really isn't that hard. Anybody here ever had to take a 1% cut in your family income? A lot of people do. In a recession, here's the irony of a recession. Everybody suffers in a recession. Your income goes down, government's income goes up. We do the wrong thing. Government should shrink also. Next. Yes.
Jury nullification could get rid of the 16th Amendment. Just, if you're on a if people don't understand the jury nullification, it repealed the prohibition, it abolished slavery, it ended the witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, and it gave us freedom of religion when Ed Bushnell was, and 4 jurors were jailed for not rendering a guilty verdict.
His point was that jury, voting your conscience on the jury can overturn bad laws, and I think that's a good point.
And it's in the platform. It's in
It is.
it's
Okay.
in the platform
All right.
today, by the way.
Young lady over here.
I have a question about education. You're talking about vouchers, getting poorer children into the schools that are better. But what about across the board education for children? Because right now, children in most of our districts are getting not so great education. Lots of things are being left out. They're doing this crazy math with Common Core. And those are my concerns with how the money is spent now on the children and the education that they're getting. And what could you do to kind of lead our, all of our politicians and all of them in the right direction to get school districts back into public control?
The first thing I do is eliminate the Department of Education. That's $100 billion that could just be given back to the states. Some of that could go into education, but it wouldn't be going to bureaucrats in Washington. My kids send me, you know, kids don't watch the regular news, but they bring me stuff that they see on the internet. So one of them brought me the other day, the Common Core solution to 32 minus 12.
Yeah.
It's like 5 different steps, and I really never fully got exactly what they were trying to do. And I was pretty good at math. And bizarre things like this. You know, I remember when I moved to Kentucky, they were sort of doing this newfangled stuff, and they wanted math to be essay questions. We weren't good enough writers, so they wanted to change math into essay, and so they had a question on one of the tests is, how would baseball be different on the moon? But you're supposed to write this open-ended essay question. They didn't really give you any numbers that you were supposed to deal with. And when I was a kid, it was pretty straightforward. The Earth's gravity is 1/8 of the moon's. What would your apparent weight be on the Earth versus the moon? You set up a fraction, you come up with an answer. But we've gotten away from all of that. Really, I think local control is better. I think local control allows more innovation. And I think all kids are not the same necessarily. They all don't learn the same. I think that all of the above, charter schools, vouchers, all of these things help. But it's not like I have a specific magic wand or bullet that I can tell you, this is how education is better. I will tell you one interesting fact, and this is a good book if you haven't read it. Malcolm Gladwell has a book called Outliers. And in it he talks about what he says is the one incontrovertible fact about where the education problems come from. He says there's a poverty gap, which a lot of people say there is. It starts out with a poverty gap like this, but actually when you go to public school it grows over 5 years. But the interesting thing is, if you measure the poverty gap in September when they start school, and then measure it again in May, it narrows. Then you measure it over the summer, it widens. So when we say, well, it's all these teachers' fault, guess what? Look in the mirror. It's parents' fault as well. And so we need better family structure. We need better family. Kids who have books in the house do better. You know, kids who, you know, all of these things are involved. And so, but they're not easy because they're cultural things that we need to restore families and hope and, you know, religion. All of these things are part of it, but they're not easily a magic wand to make it better. Young lady down here.
Senator, I'd like to follow up on that. I also wanted to ask about education. There's a Islamic cleric named Fethullah Gulen living in Pennsylvania, and his followers are called the Gulen movement, and it's a nationwide political force related to politics in Turkey. And the Gulen movement is tied in a very mysterious way to some charter schools. There's 44 of them here in Texas, and there's others across the nation and around the world. There's schools related to the Gulen movement. So I agree wholeheartedly with school choice, but I also think that local control of schools is very important. And so when we get into charter schools, it does make our school systems very complicated and difficult to oversee. So in a case like the Gulen schools or other corporations that are doing for-profit for-profit charter schools that are sucking taxpayer money out of the system, not necessarily using the money to educate children. How can we make sure that we're for responsible school choice that still has citizen oversight of where those taxpayer dollars are being spent?
I think the local school districts would have controls on where money is spent, whether or not there should be some standards for what schools should be. And it's even like national standards. I don't want the government doing it, but when I was a kid, we took the California Achievement Test, and we believed that we wanted to compare ourselves with other states, so having national standards or even having national suggestions for curriculum, none of that's really bad. It just shouldn't be dictated by the government. The one thing I would say, though, is you have to debate and be careful about whose money you think this is. You said taxpayers' money, but it's not government's money. You know what I mean? And so when we talk about this is why some people say, well, you can't give government money to religion. And let's say you object with this person's school, there will have to be a certain tolerance to letting people take money even to stuff you may object to. And should it be something that is, fraudulent in the sense that it doesn't provide education? I think you can have some controls on fraud, but it's important to know that when you have your money given to government, it's your money, and if you get some of it back in the form of a voucher, it's still your money, and you should get to choose where you take it. Religious, private, public, wherever. And most of the people who argue against this say, oh no, once the government has it, it has to be government, it can't go to religion. We had the GI Bill after World War II, and you could go to Notre Dame on the GI Bill. So you could go to a religious school. So I think it's your money, you should get a choice. This man's been raising his hand for a while.
My name is Rahman. I'm in the oil and gas business. And I have a question for you regarding. Many years ago, we instituted a ban on crude oil exports. We are now allowing gas exports out of the U.S. But what about condensate and crude oil? Where do you stand on that? Because when we ban the exports, it's creating an artificial, when we are becoming a major producer, it's creating an artificial lowering of prices in the United States.
Yeah, I'm not for really putting government controls on any exports of anything. It also kind of seems funny to me because people talk about countries getting rich who are big exporters. I would think you'd want to be an exporter of things. So it really price determines all this. Every price in the world now, particularly oil, is a worldwide price. Price will go up and down, and I'm not sure it changes much other than to restrict people's ability to find other people to sell things to restrict exports. I wouldn't do it. Straight ahead, gentleman, that.
Senator, how would you solve the problems around the VA?
Okay. The problems with the VA. Yeah. I would let any veteran that has to wait longer than a period of time or has to drive farther than a certain distance have a card or a voucher to see a private doctor locally. And we have legislation that would do that. The only caveat I would add to that is I've worked in a lot of VAs during my medical training, and they are a single-payer system. I'm not saying we get rid of them, but realize they're government medicine, and government medicine inherently has lines. It's a function of government medicine. But I think having a VA that takes care of some of the special needs of our veterans who lost limbs or have been gassed in war or any of these problems that are peculiar to veterans, I think we keep that. But really, as our veterans population grows, I don't think we just keep building veterans hospitals. We let them opt in. The people who have specific veterans issue problems stay in the VA or can get to a VA. But I'd let veterans start opting out and let the expansion of taking care of veterans go into the private system.
Yes, sir. You mentioned criminal justice reform earlier. And one of the things that I've always been curious about is how do we get, especially Republicans and people across the nation, to really rethink why we put people in prison in the first place? Because essentially, especially with young people, we're taking them out from learning a trade or from being in school or doing any sort of healthy interaction with normal people, and instead we put them in crime school for 5 years with hardened criminals to learn that set of skills instead. How do we rethink
Right.
What would you do to change that?
I think the best way to talk to people about this is, you know, when people say, oh, that's just a really crazy, radical, libertarian idea, I say, look, I remember an interview from about 15 years ago, and it was Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and Cal Thomas, 3 conservative, Christian, evangelical leaders. And they asked each one of them, they said, if a teenager, a high schooler, or a college kid in your church was caught with marijuana, what would you prefer happen to them? Incarceration or counseling? Every one of them immediately said counseling. So the thing is they're not acknowledging that it's a good thing, and I'm not either. I'm not a proponent of really any of this. But I am saying that I would much prefer try to treat it either as a health problem or something that we should try to counsel people against than incarceration. And I think if you put it that way, and then if you also say that many of us here are Christians who believe in redemption, who believe in a second chance, it's very hard to get a second chance, particularly if it's a felony. The rest of your whole life, every employer has to check a box that says I'm a convicted felon. And you'd be amazed at the people you meet who are ministers now and active in their community who are convicted felons from something they did as a kid. And most of it's not stealing or anything violent. It's usually associated with a marijuana or a drug conviction. And so I think if you approach it that way, there are many people who could be converted on it, who may not be ready for legalization, but are ready for more appropriate sentencing, less harsh sentencing, more fairness, more ability to get a second chance. And there'll be a division even in this crowd. Half of this crowd may want all legalization, or some of them may want medical marijuana. But I think everybody here, and maybe the vast majority of our counterparts in the entire convention, believe in more justice and less harshness to what we do with our kids. All right, right here at the table.
Matthew Burstein, Peace and Republican Liberty Caucus. You had mentioned earlier in your speech that we got, like more than 8 years ago, we got the House, we got the Senate, and we got the presidency, and we forgot what it meant to be conservative. Now we're looking at a time where we might get the House and the Senate again, and someone might become president. My question for you is there anything you can do now or from now until the next 4 years that might keep us in the next 8 years when we do have that majority again from forgetting what it means to be conservative?
Yeah. One of the most important things will be the budget process, going back to the previous question, is that if Republicans have both sides, they're going to be producing a budget. And if we produce a lame budget that either never balances or balances in 25 years with sort of fake accounting, I think it'll discourage a lot of you guys who have been so active and want Republicans to win. So we have to make sure we get the right Republicans. Primaries make a difference. I know you guys fight hard in your primaries in Texas. But it doesn't end also once they're elected. And I am for coming together after you finish your primaries. Come together and support your nominees. There's a big difference between Republicans and Democrats. You make them unhappy. And that's the other thing to remember about the Republicans that you get through the nomination process and that you elect. Sometimes we bitterly remember the 10 or 15% of the issues that we disagree with them. Really remember that I don't think, even if there's a Republican you don't like in your state, you probably agree with them 85% of the time. And realize that, you know, Wendy Davis or whatever, how often are you going to agree with her? You know, 5% of the time, 10% of the time, but it's not going to be anywhere close to what any of your Republicans are. And so I do believe in coming together back after the primaries, but also once they're elected, many people are influenceable by flooding them with emails and phone calls. It does make a difference. We keep track of how many people call us on every issue. And if we're getting 9-to-1 calls against an issue, we're aware of that. And so I think you still can influence your people even after they're elected. But the budget process will be important if we take over both. And then it'll some see what the president's character is like on whether he'll veto stuff. I think he's a little bit of a paper tiger and he won't veto stuff. And we might be able to get something done if we take over. Here against Swell.
Yeah, so a lot of this, maybe everybody in this room, loves policy and long-term ramifications of our choices, but I'd love to get your thoughts on tactics. I mean, you're looking at a room full of, I don't know, Rand Paul's army right here in Texas, maybe. The left views this as a war, and they're morally righteous about it. What have you learned on the campaign trail, or what can you project looking towards 2016? What have you seen? Again, we all know the grassroots machine that NGP Van and the Obama crew and Jeremy Bird, who's now active in battleground Texas, we know what they bring to the table. My personal view is the Republican world's about 2 decades behind on a lot of those things. What, in terms of the tactics, what people in this room can bring to the table to assist you or assist the cause, what's out there? What can you counsel us on?
I think policy intersects with tactics, and I think that the great thing about it is I think the country is drifting more libertarian on a lot of issues. When you ask people about foreign policy, and I think there are 2 extremes to foreign policy, and I'm neither one. I think I'm actually closer to the middle, and I present it that way. One extreme is that we're never anywhere around the world any of the time. But the other extreme is that we're everywhere around the world all the time. And I think the middle is that we have a debate in our country. When we have to go to war, we vote on it in Congress, constitutionally. We have a consensus of the people. We go to win, and we don't go to create new countries. We then come home after we win. And then I think that's a very popular position, I think becoming more popular. If you talk about having more compassion and more justice in the criminal justice area, that's not something that makes me a hard-edged right-winger. I think that's something that softens the image of conservatives. So some libertarian issues, I think actually, or libertarian-ish, is what I call it, sort of soften the image of who we are and make us not hard-hearted people that want to, get rid of Social Security or anything. And so I think there's a lot of these issues, liberty issues, that actually soften the image and help us tactically to be a bigger party and reach out. I frankly think that, imagine that Hillary Clinton, or the other nominee, she's aggressively for involvement in the Syrian war. I was adamantly opposed to it, and I think I was part of stopping us getting involved with it. Here you have a reversal of positions where you have the Republican who's more reticent for war and the Democrat more eager for war. If you look at the privacy issue in the NSA, she's you have Hillary Clinton on the side of being for bigger, more intrusive government that invades your privacy and your freedoms, and you'd have a Republican on the other side of this issue. So it depends on what we do, and it's also the reason why we nominate somebody who's a big advocate for being involved in Syria, and a big advocate for the NSA, and for the TSA, and for all of these big government overreaches. I think we'll get creamed. And independents don't want that. So really our policy actually hits not only, people think, well, you're a right-winger. Well, it does hit the right wing of our party, but it also hits the middle of the spectrum after a primary. So I think the policy actually is a huge advantage. And I think people are recognizing it, that a cookie-cutter, traditional conservative that has no infusion of any libertarian thought is not going to win the general election. Running out of voice, young lady in the middle.
Here.
Last question.
Thank you. Maybe Morrison County. So this topic. Okay. Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, who are charged with protecting the elderly. Now, even the topic is cringeworthy, because who wants to be seen as...
Topic of what?
Even these topics are a little cringeworthy, because who wants to go against for the children? Now, there's just been wild abuses in states like California, parental rights just being trampled on, Massachusetts most recently. So, and the narrative seems to go, well, here's a tragedy, so we just need more of your federal dollars, and to be funded better, then we can avert more tragedies, but meanwhile, these abuses of the Fourth Amendment keep happening. So, what are some pathways to, just securing due process?
I think a lot of it's a local issue, not a federal government issue, although some of these things get federal money. I would say that your children are a gift of God. They're under the stewardship of their parents, and there are times when the state can be involved and should be involved. Kids can't be raped, abused, there's violence. There is a role for the state, but also spanking your kid is probably not something the government needs to be involved with. Making your kid do his homework is not something the government ought to be involved with. So we've gone too far on a lot of these things, and we do need to be very careful that the government not get too involved, but also want to acknowledge that there is some role for the government in preventing violence against children. Thanks, everybody.
One of the ways to beat the party, the problem with the parties becoming gated and the parties deciding not to vote conservatively anymore, is to have a group like the RLC, which is like a party within a party. We're like the loyal opposition to the Republican Party. We stand up for the values that really matter, things that are immutable, and that's what we need to stand up to a constantly changing political perspective that doesn't make any sense. And so I'd like to encourage you to come and find out about the RLC. We're going to move over to the exhibit hall. You can come talk to any of us after this. And we can tell you about the RLC and show you some of our stuff and some of our literature. And hopefully get some recruits. That's about all I'm going to go on because I had a stroke last week, so I think I probably shouldn't talk too much. I'm planning for the sympathy card as much as possible. So there you are, and thank you very much for coming.